Hello and welcome to Two Dancing Clams. This video shows how to use geometry nodes in Blender 3.0 to control the placement of leaves along a branch while controlling the leaves in two more axes of rotation. This is the project file at its end to show you where we're trying to get to. So these little blue triangles, blue and green triangles, represent the leaves, and these lines represent the branches that the leaves are attached to. So you can see at the start, the leaves have been created and they are facing properly out from the branch, and they will stay there as we change the branch angle, which is nice. Change that back to 0. We can also rotate the leaves around the branch in a circular pattern. And we can deflect the leaves outward toward the end of the branch or back toward the trunk. And all of these stay put regardless of what we do with the angle of the branch. And that is the whole point of this. For this project, I'll be using Blender 3.3, but I believe this should work with Blender 3.0 and above. First thing first, everyone says this, but I'll say it too. I'll be using the node wrangler extensively. So the first thing I want to do is create a leaf. And I'm going to do this using the, starting with the default cube. So first of all, change its name to leaf. And I want to do this while, this is the orange dot in the center here is the origin of the object. I want to preserve the origin of the object being the same as the origin of the world. So the easy way to accomplish this is select the cube, hit tab to go into edit mode, and then G, Z to move it upwards along the Z-axis 1 unit. And now I'm holding control down to snap. Also, I want to move it 1 unit along the X-axis. So again, G, X this time, hold control down to snap, and move it along the positive X-axis. Now we have our cube sitting where we want it, and we preserve the origin also where we want it. So now I want to make this a little bit flatter. So I will go into face select mode, press 3 on the ordinary keyboard. That is something that confused me a lot when I first started Blender. The keys on the numpad do completely different things than the keys on the ordinary keyboard. If somebody says press 7, that's an entirely different thing than saying press numpad 7. And I still press the wrong thing from time to time. Anyway, so press 3 to go into face select mode, select the top face, G, Z to move it downward, and we'll just create a more pancake-like thing. Now we want to create a triangle. So now I want to go into edge select mode, press 2 for that, and now I'll select the two front edges and collapse them down to a single point so we can get a more triangle shape. I'll select this edge first, shift select the second, M for merge, at cursor. And because the cursor is also sitting at the world origin, everything nicely collapses to the cursor. So now I want to give some color to our triangle, our leaf, mostly so I can tell the top of it from the bottom of it. So go on down to the Materials tab, and we're going to make the default material green. So any color, any surface we don't give another color to will be green. And I will make it green. Now we don't see anything because we're still in solid view mode, so we'll go up here and change this to material preview. And now we see our lovely bright green color. Now we need 2 more colors, 2 more materials, so I'm going to create slots for them. The number of slots for a given object is the number of materials you can display simultaneously. And because I want to have 3 colors displayed simultaneously, I need to create 3 slots up here. The second one is going to be blue, so I will imaginatively call it blue. And the third one is going to be red. Now the red and the blue don't show up yet because they haven't been assigned to a face. So let's do this now. Because we want to have different faces, have different colors, I'll have to do this in edit mode. So tab to edit mode. 3 for face select. I'll select the top face. and I will color it blue. And to make the blue stick to this face, I need to assign it. Keep the blue side up. And the bottom face, we'll select red and assign it to the bottom. Blue top, red bottom, all is right with the world. Lastly, we want to scale this object down to a more reasonable size. So make sure the object is selected. Make sure we're not in edit mode. Thank you. And also make sure the object is selected in object mode. Press S for scale, 0.25, enter, scales it down, and then Control A, S to apply the scale. So now let's do some geometry nodes. By default, Blender creates two stacked windows at the beginning. There's a time sequence at the bottom. I almost never use it, but it's a convenient thing to turn into a geometry node editor. So let's do that now. First thing to do is to actually create geometry nodes. If you notice, this will create a modifier under the original object. Tab because I was in edit mode. We're not going to need the original geometry for a while, so we'll just put that aside. What we will want is a curved line. And you can see it sticking up on the z-axis. We'll change that after a while. Doesn't matter for now. I'm going to explain real quick what we're trying to do. You don't have to follow this if you don't want to. You can just copy down the nodes. That's perfectly fine. But for those people who like to understand the math like I do, this is for you guys. So what we're trying to do is, let's suppose we just have some line that we're given, like that. What we want to do is provide a way to rotate this line off of the XY plane, which means we will lean an axis like this. Now, I want to construct this axis. Turns out it's really easy. So if the original line was like 3 units in the x and 2 units in the y, well, you notice that this vector here is minus 2 units in the x and positive 3 units in the y. So all we really have to do is swap x for y and invert one of them. And that determines which order we do that in determines whether we get this vector or this vector. It doesn't matter. They both represent the same axis, so either one will work. Control C to get rid of all that stuff. So now we want to create the rotate node. This is where Node Wrangler really shines. So if you take this endpoint here, because the starting point is going to start at the integer, and the starting point is going to start at the origin, and we just want to move the ending point. So if we drag out here and just leave it go in empty space, this automatically brings up a search function. It will not only search for node names, but it'll search for the field within the nodes. So right now I just want the vector rotate, and we get it. And now we need to give it the axis we previously described. So for the axis, I'm just going to create a vector. So Shift A. This will be replaced later, but just for grins, just for now, it'll be 1 unit on the x-axis. So now, because we're swapping x for y, we need to separate this. So there's a node called separate xyz. xyz is the fastest way to find it, so we just bring it up here. We want to swap the x for y. So we need to negate the x or negate the y. So let's go ahead and negate the x. So drag out into space. Now I want to multiply node. And this is really handy because this will not only bring up the math node, it'll change it to multiply, and it'll hook up the node at the same time. Very handy. And to swap the sign, I just multiply by -1. And the negated x is going to turn into our y. So now we need to combine these back together. So again, x, y, z, except this time the combine x, y, z, and I want this to go into the y. I want the y to go into the x, and I want the z to stay 0. And this becomes our axis of rotation. So now we've created the axis of rotation. We just need to give it the thing to rotate. So this is Drag that over. Now you can see our original line is back. And just to show you that this actually works, change the angle, and we can see it does indeed rotate off of the axis. Yay! Now I want to use these nodes multiple times. So I'm going to create a group out of them. Simply select all the nodes, Control G for group. Now I want to take the group input and give it meaningful names. So first of all, let's go ahead and disconnect. We only need one vector as input, so I'm going to use it here and here. It's exactly what we did before. I need to give it a meaningful name, so I'm going to go over to the inputs here in the group node and change this to line to rotate. This was originally a duplicate of that, so we don't need it anymore. But then one thing we do need is the angle. And I'm going to leave that as it is because that's a perfectly fine name for it. Press Tab to get back. And now we have this node group. And I'm going to call this node group line with rotation. And we don't need this anymore either. Now you saw the original video. I like 3 lines. I like 3 lines at various rotations just to make sure that the rotate code is working no matter how our original line is pointing. Because I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten something to work, but it only works as long as the branches along the positive x-axis. So it's important to have many angles represented. So I'm just going to take this thing and duplicate it 3 times, Shift D, and Shift D. And because I want to be able to see all these at the same time, I'm going to hook this up to a join geometry. And all 3 of them. And the output. Now we're not going to see anything now because all the lines are the same and they have 0 length. So let's give them a little length. And let's call this +5 in the x and y axis. Nice diagonal line. And we will send this out along the negative x-axis, +y, and then -y, and -x. And now we have 3 lines. And because we want to be able to rotate them in the same way at the same time, just for ease of use, I'm going to hook them all up to the same value node. And that will control the angle of rotation for all of them. And now each of these will rotate up as is proper. One thing I forgot to do in this group is resample the curves so we can apply leaves to them. So I'm going to go back in here and very quickly Shift A, S, look for a resample. And 10 units is fine. That'll mean we'll place 10 leaves on each. Tab to get back out. So now I'll put some leaves along the branches. So to do that, I'll use an instance on points node. Shift A, search on points. Stick that right in here. Now the leaves that we will stick onto these were created earlier, and these come into the geometry nodes with the group input. So if we hook this up here, our leaves should appear along the branches. Yay! Also, I want to be able to see the branches. So I'm going to duplicate this join geometry node, Shift D, move it over here, and also let us see the branches. Now this is step 1. You can see the leaves are originally pointing along the positive axis, and they still are pointing along the positive x-axis, which is not what we want. We want them facing away from the branches. So in order to do that, we want to rotate them. Specifically, we want to rotate them So if this is the angle we want them to be, and this is the angle they're at, we need to know this angle. And it turns out that's really easy to calculate, because this is 1 unit on the positive axis, and this is whatever the normal to this line is. There's a function that does this. It's called a dot product. Again, you don't have to worry about the math. You can just follow along with the nodes, but if you care about the math, I'm going to explain it a little. However, the dot product is always a positive number. So if it's 30 degrees, if it's positive 30 degrees or negative 30 degrees, the dot product is always just going to be 30. We want the sign. We actually have to know which way to rotate. So in order to do that, we'll need to do something that's just a little bit more fancy, but it actually turns out to be really simple stupid when you get right down to it. This is the function that will show us the angle we need to rotate by. Now, the dot product gives us the angle with no sign. If we also calculate the determinant, now we can calculate the sign as well and learn whether we need to rotate by, for example, positive 30 degrees or negative 30 degrees. Run those through arctangent and we get our answer. Now, the reason this is far easier than it seems to be is the original x1 of our leaf is 1, which means every time x1 appears here, it doesn't matter. We can just get rid of it because multiplying by 1 doesn't change anything. The original y1 is 0, so every time it appears, that whole term drops out. So now the dot product just turns into x2, and the determinant just turns into y2. Run those through arctangent, and you have the angle we need to rotate by. So we will stick that into this rotation vector here. Give ourselves just a little bit more room. First of all, we're going to start with the other vector is going to be the normal. So Shift-A, search for a normal vector. We need the x2 and the y2 terms. So we will separate them out. Again, type x, y, z brings you right here. We want the vector input. Now we want to do this arctan function. Arctan2, sorry. And x is actually going to go into the second value. Y is going to go into the first value. This needs to be a vector. So we'll combine it back to a single vector. Because we are rotating around the z-axis, we only need to hook it up to the z. And it goes in here. And you can see, voila, the leaves are now pointing away from the branches. Now, as I previously mentioned, this can be also done with the align Euler to normal. The problem is what comes after. If I'd used align Euler to normal to create this step, then these next steps don't work at all. Now, there might be some people that understand a lot more math than I do that can make it work, but I've tried various things with align Euler to normal, ordinary rotate vectors, and for the life of me, I've never figured out a way to get this fixed, unless I start with this very simple rotation to begin with. So now we're doing pretty good. Now, if we've done our job right, when we rotate these branches, the leaves should stay in place. But you'll notice, if we look at a side view here, the leaves are stuck on the XY plane, and that's not what we want. We want them to follow the branches. Well, over here, let me quickly give this a name, F2. And set it back to 0. So in order to fix that, let me give it a bit of rotation. In order to fix this, it's pretty easy. We need to rotate along the x-axis, and that basically allows us to rotate the leaf just like that. The question is, how much do we need to rotate by? And the answer is, it couldn't be simpler. It's the amount by which the branch has been deflected. So if I hook that up to the x, now you'll see the leaves run perfectly along and they match the rotation of the branches. I wish all things in geometry nodes are that easy. Now there's two more things we want to do. We want to be able to rotate the leaves around the branch in a circular fashion. It's pretty easy too. So we will need a rotate instance node. Shift A search for rotate instances. And this is also going to be really stupid. So we're going to need to combine x, y, z. Even though we're only going to use one of the parameters, we need to have an input as a vector. So, and the thing we are going to mess with is the y rotation. And that, as you see, very nicely rotates the leaves around the branch. Now, I like giving everything a name so I don't have to remember what it was for. So let me just create a value node and give it a meaningful name. And voila. And as you can see, again, like the original video, that holds regardless of what we do with the branch rotation. One last thing is we want to allow the leaves to bend outward or rotate inward toward the trunk. So again, scoot these aside. I need one more of these. And same trick. Going to combine x, y, z so we can just mess with one of these. And this time, it's the z that we're going to mess with. And as you can see, the z is the one that controls that. And again, going to create a value node and give it a meaningful name. And now we're done. These can all be changed independently. Sweet. Now this is, if you were going to do a more elaborate project, these also can be turned into a group. So if I was going to do that, I would move all the things I'm controlling out here. Combine these with the node wrangler, and then I would join all of this to create a group. But this is where this particular project is going to stop. Thank you very much for listening.